We are in this courtroom because of a complete disregard for safety. People get away with what they're allowed to get away with. The defendants have been cutting corners for years. And the inevitable hit. A beautiful life was taken. A preventable tragedy. You sit here as members of the community to say what is acceptable in our community is unreasonably unsafe conduct acceptable. You sit in judgment of that and you speak to it. The law says you have to act reasonably to look for the safety of others. The defendants have been ignoring the law for years. Where is Michaela's law? Protecting her. This should never have happened. I talked to you in opening about the role, the investigation. How are we here? How is this allowed to happen? What are the motives? Find the truth. Because that is the purpose of trial. To ascertain the truth of why this life was taken. Opening statement is where you are told what the evidence is going to show in the case. Opening statement. Nothing underlies this. It's just a regular accident.
That's the accident that he was involved in when he was driving home from his friend's house on his way to pick up his son from school. The last thing that he wanted to happen. An accident, not due to extreme carelessness or recklessness, simply an accident on the US 95.
This was a violent collision. Trooper Fausch, she remembers it, investigated over 600 collisions. Slammed into Michaela. Her car airborne, lands on the driver's side. Ping-pongs off other cars and hits into a cement barrier. Never hits the brakes. Carnage on the roadway.
Out of the 600 some crashes, it wasn't often that we beat medical on scene. I think actually throughout my whole career it was maybe 8 times. So I beat medical on this scene, so it kind of affected me a little bit that way. It was also a little more severe than the normal crashes that we see every day.
Why we're here. The defendants gambled with the health and safety and the lives of others. Michaela paid the price. They gambled on the fact they could get away with being unreasonably unsafe. Running a business that requires you be on the road every day to get the job done. This is the time for accountability. This is the time for responsibility. It has been 5 years. The Cifuni have persevered through this. So they can have accountability for what occurred to Michaela. We live in a world where there are opportunities. Those opportunities you take advantage of if you have a license, you have the ability to do certain things. You have to apply for, obtain, and meet the requirements to have the privilege of having the license. And with license comes opportunities, not only on the road, but in business. And Ms. Dillman knows that. She knows that with a license, she can run a business and better her life.
I was working at a casino for 10 years, so I just kind of want to get out of the 5 to 9 job and, you know, make a better living. So I decided to open a business, and in our community, there were a lot of people doing the construction flooring mostly. So I decided to go to school, study, and then open a business for installation. And I knew most of them, they didn't have a license. They were like working like handyman.
With privilege comes responsibility. She started a business that put people on the road. We know she put Mr. Chitescu on the road for our floor. She started another business, that transportation business. She's aware that as a business owner, you have to abide by the rules, the safety rules. There's a purpose for them, to avoid unnecessary tragedy. You can't reap the benefits without upholding the responsibility. This wasn't an accident. It was a series of bad decisions. Decisions that benefited just making it easy, skipping steps. But when you skip those steps, tragedy can result. Mr. Chitescu knew he needed a license. He knew it. Went down there 2 or 3 times, he said. Didn't stop him from getting in that cargo van. But there's a disregard for the rules, because even in 2017 when he got it, he doesn't even look to see what the card means. Blames the DMV. They didn't tell me I had an eyesight problem. It's his eye. He knows it. It's a consistency of just disregarding the rules. This was a disaster waiting to happen. They looked for every loophole. The rules don't apply to them. Unreasonably unsafe behavior. We have clear evidence of it in this case. More promises than opening. Well, how did this happen?
What you will learn though, and I think it's significant here, because when you look at an accident like this in a vacuum, I think we're all prone to say, gee, something was going on. You know, he was picking up his sunglasses off the floor, he was texting, he must have been intoxicated, he must have been speeding. None of that exists. He wasn't impaired, not intoxicated, he wasn't texting, you'll see the cell phone records. He wasn't talking on the phone, you'll see the cell phone records. He wasn't speeding. Unusual for US 95 in my experience in the middle of the afternoon, and he wasn't otherwise distracted.
Wasn't otherwise distracted, but never saw the cars, but wasn't distracted. We know he saw the slowed traffic. We know he said he looked behind him with that right eye. We know he was trying to change lanes. Then his memory's foggy. Then he really can't remember any of it. He tells Alina, I just blacked out. No explanation. He wasn't otherwise distracted. This is just what happens. It is the duty of a driver in any vehicle using a public highway to avoid placing himself, herself, or others in danger. To use like care to avoid a crash. To keep a proper lookout for traffic and other conditions to be reasonably anticipated, and to maintain proper control of his or her vehicle. A promise and opening as to how this crash happened.
The vehicle had a failed rear tire, got a flat tire, and that vehicle stopped in the number 3 travel lane on southbound US 95. in the travel lane. And subsequently, 1 or 2 cars stopped behind that vehicle. And then finally, Michaela Cifuni, traveling in that same lane, stops behind those vehicles. And at some point, Mr. Chitescu will tell you, he checked his mirrors to make a lane change, and when he looked up, all was stopped. And it was just that quick, all was stopped, and he struck the rear of Michaela's vehicle.
Checked his mirrors, then looked up, and the promise was he saw that all was stopped. Did you see the vehicle stopped in front of you before the crash, Mr. Chitescu? No. Not a proper lookout. This is the verdict form that you have, that you'll go back into the jury deliberation room with. The court, having determined the negligence of the defendant, Mr. Chitescu, that he caused the death and injuries to Michaela, so you need not consider that issue of liability for that defendant. But you will, however, need to determine the amount of damage that he caused the Cifunis and Michaela. Let's talk about Alina Dillon. She also has duties. Ordinary care is that care which persons of ordinary prudence exercise in the management of their own affairs in order to avoid injury to themselves or to others. Now, we know that she was managing RO floor, and she knows that people need to go on the road for RO floor. And she knows that George will go do the work. Now, this instruction talks about a driver's license. And the reason why it does is, simply because someone has a driver's license, it doesn't mean that they are acting in a reasonably safe manner. Similar, if they don't have a driver's license, you can't say, well, that just makes them incompetent. Now, in this case, we know he didn't have a Nevada driver's license. And you can consider that in all of the other evidence that we know. Besides the lack of the driver's license, which Ms. Stillman knew when she gave him the keys to the cargo van, she also knew of the other inabilities for his driving. The prior violations, the prior crashes. She knew he had problems with his eyesight. I talked about this in jury selection, that root cause, and we had that error chain. How does something happen? He wasn't otherwise distracted, just a regular accident. But it's a chain of errors that lead to tragedy. No Nevada driver's license, even though living here 13 years at the time it happened. All the prior citations disregarded. Well, I can see out of my right eye when my left eye is open. He has a restriction F. All of these actions must be analyzed to see how this came to be. It was a perfect storm. Left destruction in its path. Negligent entrustment occurs when a person knowingly entrusts a vehicle to an inexperienced or incompetent person. He shouldn't be behind the wheel, especially on a daily basis, barreling down the highway in a cargo van with eyesight issues. Ms. Dillman knew all of this about him when she gave him the van to further her business for her.
You knew he only had a Romanian driver's license at the time you gave him permission to drive the 2014 cargo van back on September 11th of 2017, correct?
Correct.
And you knew that he had prior driving violations, correct?
Yes.
You knew that he had been involved in prior collisions, correct?
Well, I knew, but they were like really minor collisions. Like, it wasn't anything like big, but yes, I did know about it.
Knowing all that about him, you gave him the keys to the cargo van anyways, correct?
Well, I didn't hand him the keys. His were at home, and yeah, of course, I allowed him to take the keys.
She's a business owner. And he is using that van to further her business. Oh, we're married, he's just helping. She's a business owner, he's her employee. Why? We'll get into it, but it's because he holds himself out to be her employee, and she holds him out to be her employee. This is no different if this were an owner of a business and an employee. Mean, did you put an employee on the road who didn't have a Nevada driver's license with multiple violations, prior crashes, eyesight issues? The analysis is no different. It would be completely unacceptable. They want the loophole, well, it's my husband. Except for the fact that she is using him as an employee and benefiting from it. And the community believes him to be an employee of RO Flooring. He's holding himself out as an employee. It does not change the analysis just because they're married. She knows the requirements. This is not a case of, I had no idea. She's well aware and making decisions to ignore the rules, to break them, to benefit herself.
And you're aware that when you move to Nevada, you need to get a Nevada driver's license?
Yes, I was aware, and I am.
And when you have the Nevada driver's license, they check you to make sure that you don't have any problems that would prevent you from safely operating a vehicle on the road, right?
Correct.
And so if you go to the DMV and they tell you you have certain restrictions, you need to make sure you can accommodate for them, you would agree with me that's important?
Yes, it is important, of course.
She knows all of it and ignores it, disregards it, and gets away with it. Do you find, by preponderance of the evidence, that defendant Alita Dillman negligently entrusted the vehicle to defendant Chitescu, and that such negligence was the proximate cause of the injuries and death of Cheryl Cifuni? Yes. Not boo-boo-ink. There's been a lot of talk in this case when he wasn't an employee. I never had him as an employee. That's the loophole. Not under Nevada law. An employer is liable for negligent training or supervision of an employee. For an employer to be liable for negligent training or supervision of an employee, the person actually must actually be an employee, right? Or held out to be an employee. Under the theory of negligent training and supervision, the employer has a duty to use reasonable care in training and supervision of his or her employees to make sure that the employees are fit for their position. Fit to be operating a cargo van on Nevada roads. Those are the requirements. She knows that her non-employees, her subs, are held out to be RO Flooring employees.
So RO Floor is a business that in order to conduct anything, it has to put employees on the road to go to people's homes to do their job, correct?
I didn't have employees. I had subcontractors, and yes, but they were responsible for their own cars, their own jobs.
But these individuals were going to people's homes and they were representing that they were working for RO Floor, correct? That's what the people believed. That's what Deb Saunders believed, the review that you read yesterday.
Okay.
You understood that, right?
Okay, yeah.
I want to talk about this part of the law, where relevant evidence, which would probably be part of this litigation, is within the control of one party whose interest it would naturally be to produce it, and they fail to do so without satisfactory explanation, you may draw an inference that such evidence would have been unfavorable to that party. We know that RO Floor, back in 2017, had 2 white Chevy cargo vans. Both of them said RO Floor. The other one, well, that was one, that 2001, that was used for work. This 2014 one, well, that was just personal, right? We heard that all week. Okay, so if you have no employees, you don't do the installation yourself. George Pop, he doesn't drive that van. Who does? Who uses these RO Floor vans full of flooring equipment, right? Because that's been the question. If it isn't your husband, who is obviously in the RO Floor van full of the equipment driving around, nor does George from RO Flooring going into people's homes, who then is it? Who is this supervisor that you advertise? The one with 20 years experience who is on the site. These installers that you have with 5 years experience. Where are these people? Who are actually using these vans? All of the information held by the defendants in this case. So where's Cuckoo, right? This is the man who is using these vans, because someone has to be. You're to use your common sense. What's the purpose of these vans filled with flooring equipment if there's no one there to drive them, or to use the equipment, or to go to the homes? Because the independent contractors don't use them. A personal vehicle has nothing to do with my business. I want to talk to you about the payment.
Wouldn't you agree with me that if someone takes a vehicle and drives to someone's home and does something, let's even say the most small thing, like take measurements, that would be doing work that benefits a company? Would you agree with me?
Measurements and estimates are free.
She applies the rules she'd like to apply to herself. It is furthering the business, regardless of payment. That is work that brings in business for RO Flooring. It's a basic concept. But if I just say something else, maybe I'll just get away with it. I'm used to that. Sir, would you agree with me when you help out a business, it's furthering the interest of the business?
Would you agree with me that when you get in the RO Floor van and you drive to people's homes and you do estimates for RO Floor, you are furthering the business of RO Floor?
No.
No. It defies common sense. It defies logic. You are, as jurors, evaluating the credibility of witnesses. Credibility or believability of a witness should be determined by his or her manner upon the stand, his or her relationship to the parties, his or her fears, motives, interests, or feelings, his or her opportunity to have observed the matter to which he or she testified, and the reasonableness of his or her statements, and the strength and weaknesses of his or her recollections. If you believe a witness has lied about any material fact in this case, you can disregard the entire testimony of the witness or any portion of that testimony. You are the finders of fact. You are the ones to evaluate. You sit in judgment of that. Is it reasonable? The statements that were made on the stand, under oath in court of law, to you. You have to evaluate their conduct.
Is there anything that would have prevented you from seeing slow and stopped traffic ahead of you on the highway that day?
Nu știu, nu cred. don't know, I don't remember.
You don't have any vision problems?
No,
No?
No restrictions that prevent you from being able to see out of either eye?
no.
So tell us about these vision problems that you have.
Ce anume? What exact?
What exactly would you like to know?
So what has any doctor told you about your ability to see out of your left eye and your right eye?
Ochiul drept, am ceva probleme cu el.
I have some problems with my right eye.
Let's hear from Ms. Dillon.
You have stated in your testimony under oath that Mr. Chitescu has never performed any work for RO Flooring, correct?
Correct.
Despite all of the evidence, even sitting here in court today, he's never done any work for RO Floor, just towing the party along. Then there's a crack in it. Well, maybe he helped me a little. Then there's another crack. Okay, yes, but only in emergencies. But still maintains he's never done any work for RO Floor in front of you on the stand. The payment, it is a distinction without a legal difference.
I never paid him. I never issued a paycheck. I never paid him in cash. He wasn't on payroll. I didn't have payroll. I mean, my payroll was 1099, right?
I never paid him, so I'm not responsible for anything that he did while out on the roads in an RO Floor van. It has nothing to do with me. You will never see a pay stub, a W-2. But the law says, was he holding himself out to be an employee? Compensation has nothing to do with it. Well, I never paid him, so he's not my employee. I'm not responsible for any of the actions, any of the error chain that led to this crash. Do you find, by a preponderance of the evidence, a little bit more right than it is wrong? What is more likely than not? What makes more sense? That he's an employee of RO Floor? Was she negligent in the training and supervision by a preponderance of the evidence? No training, zero supervision. She knows that he's in that cargo van getting violations in a company vehicle. Never even looked into it. Crashes, driving in the breakdown room. Do you find by a preponderance of the evidence? What is more likely than not? September 11th, 2017. It was a life-changing day. Let's look at that day. Respondeat superior, or an employer, is held liable for the actions of their employee. If the employee, therefore an actual claim on theory of respondeat superior requires proof, the actor at issue was an employee or held out to be an employee, and the action complainant occurred within the scope of the actor's employment. Two types of evidence. We talked about this in opening. Direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. So let's look at the evidence that we have despite the testimony of the defendant. Well, we have the other George. And what did he tell us when he took the stand? He said, Mr. Chitescu, he left my house at noon. This crash happened at 1:20. So what was Mr. Chitescu doing for the hour and 20 minutes after he left Mr. Pope's house? We have his cell phone records. Here it is. And the home flipper, the one who had George programmed into her phone as George from RO floor. And we know it's clear they had no personal relationship. The only reason Ann would be texting George from RO floor is for flooring needs. So Ann texts Mr. Chitescu at 12:43. He texts her at 12:43. So that's 43 minutes after he leaves Mr. Pope's house. A woman he would only be texting for flooring needs. She texts him back at 1:28, about 8 minutes after this crash happens. We heard testimony. He was confused. Remember that? He was traumatized after this crash. A little under an hour later, she texts him again at 2:18 and at 2:33. So an hour and 13 minutes after this crash happened in the RO floor van, where he's so traumatized, he's so confused, what does he do? He texts the home flipper back. And such an important day, such a traumatic crash. What's the priority? Just getting back to the customer for whatever she needs, for her flooring needs. At 2:33, an hour and 13 minutes after he's landed in Michaela, he's texting back a customer, responding to whatever needs she has, getting materials, whatever it might be. Business. And then she texts him back at 2:46. Slams into Michaela and keeps right on going with his business. Traumatized to the point he can't function. He just goes back to work. There's no other reason to be texting with Ann the home flipper except for the flooring needs on this day when he's supposed to be just a stay-at-home dad hanging out. Why would that be such a priority? Because he's just getting his work done. Just a regular day. Going to pick up the kids. I don't know what ProSource business cards are doing there. Equipment. You must bring into consideration your everyday common sense. Common sense as to what the evidence shows in this case. They are trying desperately to say he was not working for RO Flooring. All of the evidence was to the contrary. You can draw reasonable inferences from the evidence that you feel are justified in the light of common experience. How does someone who's not working make it a first priority to text back a customer after a massive crash? Get his job done. Like he has been for years, dating back to 2013, when he went to Ms. Saunders' house. He's been working for years. This is what they want you to believe. Miss Dillman, his wife, owns a flooring company. George Pope, his friend, he's an experienced flooring installer. He has friends whose names he can't remember. They work in the flooring industry. They want you to believe that Mr. Chitescu is the only one there not working in flooring. He's just surrounded in a sea of people in the flooring industry, and he stays out of it. Except for, we know he installs floors. He's been doing it for years. Going into people's homes, measurements, estimates. That's what the evidence shows in the case. Do you find by preponderance of the evidence that defendant Chitescu is acting in the course and scope of his employment for defendant Boo Boo Inc. on September 11th, 2017? Yes. What about the damages? Loss of companionship, society, comfort, consortium. You can consider whether Michaela was kindly, affectionate, or otherwise. She was. This is a massive loss. These people are true grit. They want justice for Michaela. They live with it every day. You saw true pain. You saw real loss. Epic loss. It takes his breath away. You could feel it. They've experienced tragedy. They have been strong together. They have leaned on each other. They have learned how to express their feelings. They have learned the value of life and the value of loss. Damages for Michaela. Her pain, suffering, and disfigurement. Those minutes in the car, gasping for air. This is Michaela in the hospital. For the 13 days she lived. The craniectomy they did immediately upon bringing her in. Any sorrow, grief, or loss suffered. Those minutes in the car, scared, alone, felt laid on the driver's side until Good Samaritans righted it and tried to save her. Before those eyes became fixed and dilated, she suffered. Those last minutes of conscious life. And then those 13 days in the hospital. Before she left this earth. For that, $500,000 a day would be $6,500,000 for her pain, her suffering, and her disfigurement. Her past medical expenses, we heard from the UMC, custodian of records, the $341,114.60. How do you value the loss to her parents? The minutes, hours, weeks, months, and years. They have lived without her, and they continue to. They had 19 years with her. Just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of you. They loved her so much. They had 19 years, and they'll likely have many more. Being reminded of her when they see thick hair or hear the name Michaela. 19 divided by 2. $9,500,000 for Cheryl Cifuni. $9,500,000 for Michael Cifuni. That is guidance. If you feel as though that undervalues a life, you can put whatever number is right for you. If you feel that overvalues a life, You can put whatever number is right for you. It is guidance and true loss. This verdict will speak. But we could give it all back for just another minute.
Can you tell us what your hopes were for Michaela?
I wanted her to be happy, you know? I wanted her to enjoy life. I wanted her to be the person that I knew she could be.
This verdict closed the loophole. The conduct is unacceptable in our community. The tragedy hit as a result. Life is precious. Every step of it. Unreasonably unsafe behavior that ends it is unacceptable. That's all she got. The rest was taken from her and her family. It's justice for Michaela and her family. This was wrong. It will right a wrong, and it will deter further injustice. Thank you for your time.